Welcome back to Sleep Storyteller, where every night is a new adventure, and every story is a journey into the unknown. I'm so glad you're here, ready to relax, unwind, and let the gentle sound of rain guide you into a peaceful slumber. As we begin tonight's story, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the world outside fade away. Remember, this is your space, a place to let go, to dream, and to find the calm you need. If you're ready for tonight's story, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing what helps you relax most at night. Now, let's begin. The eternal flame, the sun had long since dipped behind the distant horizon, leaving the world wrapped in the quiet embrace of twilight. The village of Kerith lay at the edge of the great wilderness, where the forest met the mountains, and where the wind whispered secrets of forgotten times. Yet, even in the stillness of evening, there was an undeniable sense that something was stirring. Something ancient, something powerful. In the center of Kerith, a flame flickered in the heart of the village, a flame that had burned for centuries, passed down through generations of villagers who believed it held the essence of life itself. They called it the eternal flame. It had never wavered, never dimmed, even in the fiercest storms or the darkest nights. But tonight, as the villagers gathered around the flickering light, something was different. Daria stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart heavy with the weight of a question that had lingered in her thoughts for as long as she could remember. Why had the flame never gone out? And more importantly, what would happen if it did? The elders, wise with age and knowledge, often spoke of the flame as though it were more than just a symbol. They spoke of it as a guardian of life, of balance, of the very essence of the village's survival. Yet, despite the reverence with which they treated the flame, none could explain its true origin, or the strange feeling Daria had often sensed when standing in its presence. It was as though the flame knew her, knew every secret she kept buried in the depths of her soul. As the village gathered around the fire tonight, the usual songs and dances were subdued. The air was thick with anticipation, for it was the eve of the great festival of light, a celebration held once every decade to honor the flame and to ensure that the village would continue to thrive. But this year, there was an unspoken tension in the air. No one spoke of it aloud, but Daria could feel it. Something was coming. The village elder, Amen, stepped forward from the crowd. His long, silver hair flowed down his back like a river of moonlight, and his robe shimmered with intricate patterns of gold and blue, reminiscent of the night sky. His deep-set eyes scanned the gathered villagers, and for a moment, the weight of his gaze seemed to fall upon Daria. "You feel it too, don't you, child?" he asked, his voice soft yet carrying the weight of years of knowledge. Daria nodded, though she hadn't spoken a word. She had no need to. The elder knew her better than anyone. "There is a disturbance," Amen continued, his voice growing darker. "The eternal flame is flickering in ways it should not. The balance is threatened." A murmur spread through the crowd, but Daria stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the flame. It was a small, steady light, yet the shadows around it seemed to bend and twist as though drawn to it. The fire, which had always been warm and comforting, now seemed to pulse with a coldness that sent a chill through the air. Amen raised his hand, signaling for silence. The crowd obeyed. "The flame is a gift," the elder continued, "but it is also a burden. It is tied to the land, to the heart of this village. And tonight, It is calling for something, someone. I fear that whoever answers that call will not return the same." Daria's heart raced. She had heard the stories, the old legends about the eternal flame and the trials that awaited those who were chosen to tend it. She had always wondered if she would be the one to answer its call, but she had never truly believed that it would come to pass. But now, standing here, feeling the weight of the air and the eerie shift in the flame's glow, she knew it was her. The flame was calling her. As if sensing her thoughts, the elder turned to her, his ancient eyes narrowing. "It is you, isn't it?" Daria felt her breath catch in her throat. The crowd parted slightly, and she could feel every gaze upon her. The weight of their expectation was palpable, and yet, it was nothing compared to the weight that pressed on her heart. She began, her voice trembling slightly. "What is it asking of me, elder?" Amon stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It asks for sacrifice." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "But the nature of that sacrifice, no one knows." Daria swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She had grown up hearing the stories of the eternal flame, of its unwavering presence and its ability to protect the village, to keep it safe from harm. But never had she heard of a sacrifice. Never had anyone mentioned the possibility that the flame might demand something more than devotion. "Do you have the courage to answer its call, Daria?" Amon asked, his voice almost gentle now. "To face whatever is waiting for you?" Her heart thudded in her chest. She knew, deep down, that this was not just about the flame. This was about her. Her journey. Her destiny. The villagers watched in silence as Daria stepped forward. Her feet moving of their own accord. The flame flickered wildly, casting strange shadows on her face, as if the very fire were alive, watching her. With every step she took, the ground seemed to hum beneath her feet, the pulse of the village itself calling her closer to the flame. When she reached the edge of the fire's light, the world seemed to fall away. Time stood still, the night air thick with tension. The flame danced before her, its light shifting in strange patterns that whispered ancient secrets. And there, in the heart of the flame, she saw something that made her heart stop, a vision, fleeting and unclear, yet unmistakable in its significance, a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing in the center of a vast, swirling darkness. Their face was obscured, but their presence was undeniable. A cold, malevolent presence that seemed to beckon to her, to draw her in. She recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. But the flame called to her again, urging her forward. She had no choice. With a final, trembling breath, Daria stepped into the light of the eternal flame, and the world shifted. Daria's skin prickled with the sudden intensity of the flame's presence. It wasn't just warmth that radiated from the fire now, it was something deeper, something older than anything she had ever felt. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the cool bite of the night wind. But beneath it, there was an undeniable current of power. It flowed through her veins, surging with a force she couldn't comprehend. As she stepped closer to the fire, her feet no longer seemed to touch the ground. Instead, she was drawn into its very essence, the flame's tendrils wrapping around her like an invisible force. The villagers behind her murmured in fear, their voices fading into a distant echo. It was as though she were no longer in the same world, her heart raced in her chest, but there was no fear. Only the quiet hum of something familiar, a feeling that had been buried within her all her life. She reached out instinctively, her hand trembling slightly as it neared the flame. The moment her fingers brushed the air around it, something inside her shifted, the flame pulsed, once, twice, and then the world shattered. In an instant, Daria was no longer in the village square. The ground beneath her feet vanished, and she felt herself falling, tumbling through the vast expanse of night. The sky above her was a tapestry of endless stars, swirling like a cosmic dance. She tried to cry out, but no sound escaped her lips. She was weightless, adrift in the darkness, and yet, she was not alone. A cold, suffocating presence hovered just beyond the edges of her vision. It was faint at first, a shadow in the corner of her mind, but it grew with every passing moment. The figure from the vision, the one cloaked in shadow, was here. Their form flickered, impossible to grasp, a silhouette against the stars. She couldn't see their face, but she could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting. Then came the voice. It was not a sound but a whisper that echoed through the very fabric of her being. "You are here." The words reverberated in her mind, cold and ancient. "You have come." Daria's pulse quickened. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The presence before her seemed to grow, its darkness expanding until it surrounded her, swallowing up the stars. "What is this?" she managed to think, her mind racing with questions. "This is the path you must walk." The voice was harsh, like the scraping of stone against bone. "The flame you seek is both your salvation and your undoing. You have no choice but to follow where it leads." She wanted to resist, to pull away, but the darkness closed in tighter, pressing against her chest. It was suffocating, yet Daria could not tear herself from it. She had asked for answers, and now they were being given, not in the form she expected, but in a way she could not yet understand. And then, like a sudden gust of wind, the pressure lifted. The darkness receded, leaving her standing at the edge of a great precipice. Before her, the world stretched out in every direction, an endless expanse of twisted landscapes, forests of blackened trees, mountains whose peaks were lost in the clouds, and seas that churned with a dark, oily surface. The sky above was an unsettling shade of crimson, as if the very heavens were on fire. At the center of this strange world stood a towering spire, a jagged, obsidian tower that seemed to pierce the very sky. And there, at the foot of the tower, stood a figure. Daria's breath caught in her throat. The figure was cloaked in shadows, just as the presence had been, but this one was different. They were solid, their form unmistakably human. The cloak they wore shimmered with an iridescent quality, shifting in color like the surface of a moonlit ocean. It seemed to absorb the very light around it, casting no shadow, no reflection. The figure's face, obscured by the hood of their cloak, was nothing more than an impenetrable void. "The flame calls to you." The voice was the same, cold, emotionless, but now it seemed closer, as though it came from the figure itself. "It has chosen you, Daria. You must seek its heart." Daria shook her head. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" The figure stepped forward, and with every movement, the air grew colder, the darkness deeper. "You are bound to the eternal flame, just as it is bound to you. But its purpose is far greater than mere protection. It is a key, a key that can open doors to worlds beyond this one. But there is a price. Daria took a step back, her heart pounding. What price? The figure raised their hand, and the world around her shifted once more. The twisted landscape vanished, replaced by images of her own life, memories she had long buried, both joyous and painful. Her childhood in Kerith, her family, the quiet days spent in the village square, the laughter shared with friends. But there were also darker memories, the times when she had felt alone, when she had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. The price is sacrifice. The voice was not harsh now, but almost gentle. The flame will give you the power to shape fate itself, but you must be willing to give up what you hold dear. Daria's chest tightened. I won't lose anything. The figure tilted their head, as though studying her. The choice is not yours to make, child. It is the flame that decides, not you. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the vision began to fade. The world around her blurred, and the figure disappeared into the swirling shadows. Daria gasped, stumbling back as the sensation of falling returned. Her body jerked upright, and she found herself back in Kerith, standing at the edge of the eternal flame. The crowd of villagers was still gathered around her, their faces filled with awe and fear, but the flame, it was no longer the same. The fire had changed. The golden light had deepened into an eerie, shifting hue, a color between red and violet, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. It flickered like a heartbeat, faint, fragile, yet somehow eternal. Daria's hand shook as she reached out toward it, but before her fingers could touch the flame, a voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Do not touch it again, child. Daria turned. The elder, Aemon, had moved closer, his face grim with concern. The flame has called to you, but it has also marked you. He paused, his eyes searching her face. It will not be long before it demands its price. Daria opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. She didn't know what to say. The truth of it, the weight of the flame's power, was too much to grasp all at once. And so, she stood there, before the eternal flame, unsure of what was to come, but knowing, deep in her heart, that the journey had only just begun. Daria could feel the weight of the elder's words pressing down on her as if the very air around her had thickened with the gravity of the moment. The flame had chosen her, marked her, and now the burden was hers to carry. She could no longer escape it, no matter how much she wished to. The villagers, who had been watching with rapt attention, murmured among themselves, their eyes flicking nervously from Daria to the flickering light of the eternal flame. They had seen the transformation, how the fire seemed to shift when Daria stepped forward. How the shadows had stretched unnaturally long, as if the flame itself had recognized something in her, but Daria's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't tear her thoughts away from the vision she had just witnessed, the towering spire, the figure in the shadows, the cold, distant voice. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating through her very bones. The price is sacrifice. The flame will give you the power to shape fate itself, but you must be willing to give up what you hold dear. What would she lose? The thought gnawed at her, a persistent ache in the pit of her stomach. How could she give up something she didn't understand yet? What would she have to face in order to keep the flame alive? To protect her people and the land they called home? The elder's voice pulled her back to the present. You must understand, child, Amen said, his tone softer now but no less serious. The flame is not just a beacon of light. It is the heartbeat of this land. Without it, Kerith would fall into darkness. It keeps the balance between the forces of creation and destruction. But it is not a force that can be controlled by mere will. It is ancient, untamable. Daria turned to look at him, her eyes full of questions. But why me? Why did it call me? Amen met her gaze with a solemn expression, as though he had been expecting this question, though perhaps he had hoped it would never come. You have always been tied to the flame, whether you knew it or not. There are ancient bloodlines in this village, bloodlines that have been destined to protect the flame. Your lineage goes back further than even I can trace. You are more than just a keeper of the flame, Daria. You are its guardian. The word struck her like a blow, though it wasn't as much the word itself, but what it implied that unsettled her. Guardian, her mind raced as she tried to grasp the weight of what he was saying. A guardian of the flame? She had never considered herself as anything other than a village girl, raised by kind parents, content with a simple life. She had never wanted to be tied to anything as great or as terrifying as what the elder was describing. You were chosen, but the choice does not belong to you alone, Amen continued, his voice growing more urgent now. The flame has a will of its own. It will demand sacrifices, things you may not be ready to give. And once it calls, it is not easy to turn away. The fire behind him flickered, and Daria could almost hear it whispering her name in the crackle of the embers. She felt a pull toward it, as though the flame were calling her back, urging her to come closer, to embrace the path that was being set before her. She wasn't sure whether it was her own desire or the flame's influence that made her steps heavy as she moved forward. What must I do? She asked, her voice trembling. But resolute, Amen's expression softened, though his eyes remained grave. The flame's power is bound to the heart of the land. You must travel to the lost vale, where the flame first took root. There, you will uncover the truth of your lineage, and you will learn what the flame truly asks of you. The crowd around her gasped. The lost vale was a place of legend, shrouded in mystery and fear. No one from Kerith had ventured there in living memory. The elders spoke of it only in whispers, of a land where time twisted, and the spirits of the past roamed freely. Daria's heart sank. The lost vale. No one has gone there in generations. It's said to be cursed. Amen nodded slowly. That is true. The journey will not be easy. But it is the only way. The flame's power is fading. If it is not rekindled in the vale, it will die, and with it, all that you hold dear. The village, the land, everything. All will fall into darkness. The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. Darkness. The thought of Kerith falling to such a fate was unbearable. She had always loved the village, the bustling market square, the warm fireside evenings, the laughter of children running through the streets. The idea of losing it all sent a cold shiver through her veins, but how could she do it? How could she journey to the lost vale, to a place where no one had returned from? Where time itself bent and twisted, and the very air seemed to whisper death. What if I fail? Daria asked, the fear now creeping into her voice. What if I am not strong enough to bear this responsibility? Amon stepped closer to her, his voice gentle but firm. The flame has never chosen weak souls, Daria. It has chosen those who are tested, those who have the strength to endure what others cannot. And though the path ahead will be perilous, you are not alone. The flame will guide you. You carry within you a strength far greater than you know. Daria looked at the fire again, its glow casting long shadows across her face. The flame was alive, and somehow, she could feel its heartbeat in her chest. In her bones, calling to her. It felt like home, and yet it felt like a stranger's touch, intimate and unfamiliar all at once. The bond between them was undeniable, a connection that was as old as the village itself. You must go, Daria, Amon said softly. Tonight. The flame's pulse is weakening, and every moment you wait is a moment that brings us closer to the end. The urgency in his voice stirred something deep within her. She had no time to question or hesitate. The flame was fading, and she was the only one who could save it. There was no turning back now. With a final, heavy breath, Daria nodded. I will go. I will do whatever it takes. Amon smiled faintly, a look of pride crossing his features. May the flame guide you, Daria. May it light your path in the darkness. And with those words, Daria turned toward the distant mountains, the path ahead shrouded in mystery and fear. The village of Kerith lay behind her, and ahead stretched the unknown, a journey into the heart of darkness, into the very heart of the eternal flame. She didn't know what awaited her there, but she knew one thing for certain: she could never go back. Not until the flame was restored, or until the cost was paid, and so, with the weight of destiny on her shoulders, Daria stepped forward, into the night. Daria's footsteps were quiet against the soft earth as she moved through the forest, the moon hanging above her like a pale lantern in the sky. The trees, ancient and towering, loomed overhead, their twisted branches creaking and groaning in the wind. It was as if the very forest itself was alive, watching her with 1,000 unseen eyes, waiting for her to falter. The path ahead was unclear, a winding trail that seemed to twist in on itself with each step she took. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and the distant howl of wolves sent a chill through her veins. But Daria pushed on, the fire within her chest, no, the flame in her blood, urging her forward. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a constant, insistent rhythm that gave her strength, but also fear. It had been hours since she had left the village behind. Yet the land around her remained eerily still. No birds sang in the trees, no insects chirped in the underbrush. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if it, too, was waiting for something to happen. Waiting for her to reach the vale. The forest grew denser as she traveled deeper, the trees thickening so closely that they almost seemed to close in around her. The path beneath her feet grew more treacherous, roots and rocks jutting out at odd angles. She stumbled once or twice, but her resolve was unshaken. She had to keep going. The flame would guide her, the elder had said, but the journey was not just physical. Every step forward felt like a test of her mind, her very soul. She could feel the pull of the flame within her. A burning weight in her chest, and it was growing stronger as she moved further into the forest. There were times when the sensation almost felt like it was choking her, like she was suffocating under the weight of it. And yet, she couldn't stop. Not now, the whispers had started again. Soft, barely audible at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But soon, they became clearer, more distinct. Her name, repeated over and over, echoed through the trees, Daria. Daria, she stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was not coming from the trees or the wind. It was inside her. The flame, she realized. It was calling to her, whispering its ancient song. Trying to guide her, perhaps even warning her, "Don't listen to the whispers," she reminded herself. Focus. Stay strong, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and now they were accompanied by another sound, the faintest rustling, the softest crack of a twig. Daria spun around, her heart racing. There, standing at the edge of the path, was a figure. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, another trick of the light or the shadows. But as her eyes adjusted, the figure became clearer. A woman, cloaked in black, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, like the moon reflecting off still water. The woman was tall, with an air of grace that was both unsettling and beautiful. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her as if waiting for Daria to make the first move. "Who are you?" Daria demanded, her voice steady despite the fear knotting in her stomach. The woman smiled, but it was a smile that held no warmth. "I am but a messenger," she replied, her voice smooth and silken, as if she were speaking from a great distance, even though she was standing right in front of Daria. "A messenger of the flame." Daria's heart skipped a beat. The flame. She had been warned about the forces that served the flame, but she hadn't expected one to appear so suddenly, and certainly not in such a form. "What do you want?" Daria asked, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her belt. She wasn't sure what use it would be against something like this, but it was the only weapon she had. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if amused by Daria's gesture. "I do not seek to harm you, child. I am here to help you, as you walk the path of the flame." Daria narrowed her eyes. "Help me?" She took a step back, unwilling to lower her guard. "Why would you want to help me?" "Because, little one," the woman said, her voice softening, "the flame is dying, and you have the power to save it. But there are others who seek to take that power for themselves." Daria's breath caught in her throat. "Others?" The woman nodded. "Others who would see the flame snuffed out forever. They will stop at nothing to claim its power, to control it for their own purposes. And you, Daria, you are the only one who can stop them." The forest around them seemed to grow darker as she spoke, the shadows thickening like a veil falling over the land. The air itself seemed to grow colder, and Daria could feel the weight of the woman's words settle into her bones. "Why should I trust you?" Daria asked, her voice trembling despite herself. "How do I know you are not one of them?" The woman's smile remained, but her eyes hardened. "You do not have a choice, Daria. Trust me or not, the path before you will lead you to the truth. But you cannot turn back now. The flame has already chosen you." Daria's heart thundered in her chest as the reality of her situation settled over her like a storm. She was alone in the woods, with nothing but the flame's whispered call and this mysterious stranger who claimed to be a messenger. The weight of it all was suffocating, but she knew there was no turning back. The flame had chosen her, and it was up to her to carry its burden. Who are they? Daria demanded, her voice firm now. Who are these people who would try to take the flame? The woman's smile faltered, and for a moment, Daria thought she might answer. But instead, the figure merely stepped back, disappearing into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. You will know them soon enough. The woman's voice echoed in the distance. Trust the flame, child. It will guide you. Daria stood frozen for a long moment, her thoughts racing. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in her throat. There was no one here to help her. She was on her own now. With a deep, steadying breath, Daria turned back to the path, the fire in her chest guiding her forward, despite the darkness closing in around her. She couldn't afford to let fear take root. She had a mission, a purpose, and she would not let anything, no matter how strange or terrifying, stop her. The lost veil awaited, and with it, the answers she so desperately sought. She moved forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the forest. Her heart and the flame pulsing in time, as the world around her seemed to fall into deeper shadow. The night seemed to stretch endlessly as Daria continued her journey, her steps quickening in an almost frantic rhythm. The eerie silence that enveloped her was broken only by the sound of her own breath, ragged and sharp in the cold air. Her mind raced, trying to process everything the mysterious woman had told her. The flame was dying, and she was the key to saving it. But who could she trust? Was the woman truly a messenger, or was she simply another agent of the darkness that seemed to lurk everywhere? The path had become more treacherous, the forest thickening into an impenetrable mass of brambles and low-hanging branches. Daria's eyes scanned the shadows, but there was nothing to be seen. The moonlight barely filtered through the dense canopy, and the air felt suffocatingly close, pressing in on her as if the forest itself was trying to swallow her whole. The flame in her chest pulsed again, this time with an urgency that she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a call, it was a demand. She felt the power of it, like a firestorm raging beneath her skin. She knew that the closer she got to the veil, the more intense it would become. The flame wasn't just a gift, it was a force. A force that had chosen her, for reasons she still didn't understand. The sound of leaves rustling in the distance made her freeze. Her hand instinctively went to the dagger at her waist. She wasn't sure why she still carried it. She had no real illusions about its ability to protect her from whatever might come. But it was all she had. Her heart raced as the sound grew closer. Something, or someone, was moving through the forest. She crouched low, trying to remain hidden, but the rustling stopped. For a moment, all was still. Too still, and then, just as she was about to rise and continue, a voice echoed from the darkness. It was low, almost a growl, but it carried a weight of ancient power. You shouldn't be here, Daria. Her blood ran cold. The voice was unlike anything she had ever heard before, rich with an ancient, otherworldly resonance. It sounded almost familiar, yet it wasn't. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she slowly turned, scanning the area for any sign of the speaker. From the shadows emerged a figure, a man, tall and gaunt, with features twisted in an unsettling way. His eyes glowed with the same pale, ethereal light that had emanated from the woman earlier, but these eyes were darker, filled with something far more sinister. He was clad in dark robes that blended with the shadows, as if he was part of the night itself. Daria's hand tightened around her dagger. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though it shook with barely contained fear. The man smiled, and it wasn't a comforting smile. It was cold, distant, as though he were amused by her presence, a mere distraction in his eternal world. "I am the one who watches over this land. I am the flame's keeper, or rather, I was." His words sent a shiver down Daria's spine. The flame's keeper. She had heard of such figures in legends, the guardians of the ancient powers, those who were bound to the flame's eternal cycle. But they were supposed to be long gone, buried beneath centuries of time. How could this man still be here, in the heart of the forest, speaking of the flame as though he were its master? "You were the keeper?" Daria asked, her voice incredulous. "What happened to you? Why are you still here?" The man's smile faded, his eyes darkening with something far more dangerous than before. "The flame chose you," he said, his voice a low hiss, "but it did not choose me. I was cast aside, forgotten. And now I wait. I wait for the one who will return to claim what was taken from me." Daria's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back. She could feel the flame within her growing stronger, its pull almost unbearable now. The force of it was no longer just a flickering sensation, it was a raging inferno, scorching her from the inside out. She had to find the veil. The answers were there, somewhere, buried beneath the earth, hidden in the whispers of the ancient ones. "You speak of the flame as if it is something to be controlled," Daria said, trying to steady her breath. "But it isn't something to be owned. It's alive. It's part of me." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the trees. "You believe the flame is your ally?" he asked, stepping closer. "You are a fool. The flame does not choose its servants lightly. And it does not serve you, girl. It will burn you alive if it must." The words struck a chord deep inside Daria, a sudden realization dawning on her. The flame wasn't just a gift, it was a curse. It had chosen her, but not because it loved her. It had chosen her because she was a tool to be used. And the more she fought against that truth, the more it would consume her. Her hand tightened around the dagger. "I don't need your help. I'll find the veil on my own." The man's eyes glinted dangerously as he stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming. "You cannot escape it. The veil is not a place for you to walk into willingly. The flame will claim you, just as it claimed me. And when it does, you will be just another forgotten servant, lost to the shadows." With a sudden, violent movement, he reached out, grabbing her arm with an iron grip. Daria gasped as the flame within her roared to life, the heat of it flaring like a wildfire. But she didn't fight it. She let it build, let it surge through her body until it was no longer a part of her, but all of her. She twisted in his grasp, her free hand coming up to press against his chest. And the flame burst forth in a torrent. The man recoiled, staggering back, his face contorting in pain as the fire from Daria's body surged toward him. He let out a scream, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the flame, which consumed the space between them like a consuming wave. For a moment, there was nothing but fire and shadows. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the flame receded. Daria stood, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. The man was gone, nothing left but a trail of ash and smoke swirling in the air. Her body trembled, not just from the exertion of using the flame, but from the weight of what she had just done. She had fought back, used the flame to defend herself. But what did it mean? What had she become? There was no time to dwell on that now. The forest was still. The shadows seemed to grow deeper, colder. The flame inside her, though, was no longer a mystery. It had chosen her, yes. But it was also part of her now. She would have to learn to control it, or it would destroy her, and the veil was still ahead. Daria took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Whatever awaited her in the veil, she would face it. She had no other choice. With the flame in her heart and the darkness closing in, Daria pressed on into the unknown. The forest around her seemed to shift, the trees groaning with the weight of ancient secrets. The air felt heavier now, as though it were thick with the pressure of something unseen, something that had been waiting for her arrival. The shadows had deepened in the wake of the confrontation, and the quiet was almost unnatural, as if the very world held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Daria walked with purpose, each step carrying her further into the heart of the forest. Her mind raced with thoughts of the strange encounter with the man, if he could even be called a man. He had spoken of the flame as though it were both a blessing and a curse, a power that could destroy or save. Was that the true nature of the flame? Was it a force she could control, or was it simply controlling her? Her hand still rested on the dagger at her side, though she knew that it was no longer enough. The flame that burned inside her had become more than just a gift or a weapon. It was her guide, her anchor in the chaos that surrounded her. She had to find the veil. It was the only place where she could learn to understand what the flame truly meant, and what her role in its vast, endless cycle might be. But the deeper she ventured into the forest, the more she felt the pull of the flame, stronger now, like a compass pointing her in a direction she wasn't sure she wanted to follow. Her chest felt tight, the sensation of it growing more intense with every passing moment. It wasn't just the forest that had changed, it was her. The flame was altering her in ways she didn't fully understand. It was as though it was rewriting her very essence. Suddenly, she stopped, her feet frozen in place. Ahead, the forest opened up into a small clearing. The moon hung high above, casting its pale, silvery light down upon the center of the glade. And there, at the heart of the clearing, stood a stone structure, weathered by time but still remarkably intact. The stones were dark, almost black, and they hummed with an energy that sent a shiver through Daria's body, the veil. She had found it. Daria's breath caught in her throat as she took a tentative step forward. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since she had started her journey, she felt the weight of her destiny press down upon her like an invisible hand. This was it, the place that had been spoken of in ancient prophecies, the place where the flame was born and where it would end. The place where the guardians had once stood, and where she would either find her salvation or her destruction. The stone structure was circular, with tall, slender pillars that rose from the ground like ancient sentinels. Their surfaces were etched with intricate runes, glowing faintly in the moonlight. In the center of the structure was a raised altar, and upon it lay something that made Daria's blood run cold, a flame. It wasn't the same as the one that burned within her chest. No, this flame was pure, pristine in its intensity. It flickered, but the light it cast was powerful, almost blinding, as though it held within it the power of the entire universe. Daria felt a pull towards it, a gravitational force that seemed to come not just from the flame but from the very structure itself. Her heart raced as she took another step closer. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, she wondered if she was truly prepared for what was to come. The flame was calling to her. She could feel it deep in her soul. She stepped forward again, and suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "You have come." Daria froze. The voice was soft, yet it echoed through the clearing like a distant thunderclap. It was feminine, yet it carried an authority that was impossible to ignore. She spun around, but there was no one there. The clearing remained empty, the only movement the flickering of the flame on the altar. "Who's there?" Daria called out, her voice steady but filled with trepidation. The voice responded, this time coming from all directions, as though it were emanating from the very stones around her. "I am the keeper of the flame. And you, Daria, are the one who has been chosen." The words sent a jolt of recognition through her. And she felt the flame inside her stir in response. It wasn't just a power, it was a bond. She was connected to it in a way that transcended understanding. "What does it mean?" Daria asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What have I been chosen for?" There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again, this time more gently. "You have been chosen to carry the flame, to protect it from the darkness that seeks to consume it. The flame is the heart of this world, Daria. Without it, all life would cease. The balance would be shattered." Daria's mind spun. She had known that the flame was important, but she hadn't understood the true extent of its power. The flame was more than just a symbol. It was the very essence of life itself. And she was its guardian now. "I don't understand," Daria said, her heart racing. "Why me? Why was I chosen?" The voice grew softer, almost as if it were trying to console her. "You were chosen because you are of both light and shadow. You are the one who can walk the fine line between creation and destruction. The flame chose you because it saw in you the strength to face what is coming." Daria swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What's coming?" The voice hesitated, and for a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. When it spoke again, it was filled with sorrow. "The flame is dying, Daria. Its light is fading. And the darkness is growing stronger. If the flame is not reignited, if it is not restored to its true power, the world will fall into shadow." Daria felt the weight of those words settle over her like a heavy cloak. The world, her world, was on the brink of destruction. "How can I save it?" she asked, her voice shaking. The voice was silent for a long moment before it spoke again, its tone filled with quiet urgency. "You must embrace the flame, Daria. Let it become one with you. Only then can you restore its true power. But be warned, once the flame is fully awakened, there will be no going back. You will become its vessel, and the world's fate will rest on your shoulders. Daria's heart raced. Could she truly do this? Could she bear the weight of the world on her shoulders? But even as she questioned, she knew there was no turning back. She had already chosen this path, whether she realized it or not. The flame was a part of her, and she was a part of it. With a deep breath, Daria stepped toward the altar, her heart steadying. The flame was waiting for her. It was time to embrace her destiny. Daria's fingers brushed the edge of the stone altar, and the world seemed to shift around her. The air thickened, swirling with unseen forces. Her heart pounded in her chest, the sound reverberating in her ears, nearly drowning out the stillness of the forest. The flame before her pulsed, its light flickering in time with her breath. It was as if it was waiting for her to make the final choice. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch it, the warmth of the flame drawing her in like a magnet. She hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Could she truly become one with it? Could she bear the responsibility of such an immense power? The voice of the keeper echoed again in her mind. You were chosen, Daria. The flame chose you because it knows you are strong enough to carry its weight, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. The darkness that had been growing within her since the flame first ignited seemed to stir, twisting in the depths of her soul. Could she control it? Or would it consume her as it had consumed others before her? With a deep breath, Daria steeled herself. There was no turning back. If she didn't act, the world would fall into shadow, and the flame would be lost forever. She had already felt the tug of its power deep within her bones. She could feel it. It was a part of her now. Her fingers brushed against the flame, and in that instant, the world seemed to disappear. The forest around her vanished, replaced by a vast expanse of stars. The sky stretched endlessly above, a shimmering ocean of cosmic light. She could feel the weight of eternity pressing against her, the vastness of the universe unfolding before her eyes. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. At the center of the cosmic expanse stood the flame, no longer contained within the stone altar, but now an ethereal presence that burned with an intensity that seemed to touch every corner of the universe. It was not just a flame, it was life itself, the heartbeat of the cosmos. Daria felt her breath catch as she realized that this was the heart of all things, the source of creation and destruction. This was the eternal flame. You have come, the voice of the keeper whispered, though it no longer came from any particular direction. It seemed to emanate from everywhere, filling her mind with its gentle but powerful tone. And now, you must make your choice. Daria looked around, her heart pounding. The vastness of the universe, the flame at its center, was overwhelming, and she felt small in comparison. Yet, there was something inside her that stirred, something that resonated with the flame. It was her. She was a part of this. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling in the stillness of the cosmos. The keeper's voice was calm, but there was an urgency to it. The flame cannot remain in its current state. It is dying, fading away. Only one who is worthy can restore it. You, Daria, have the power to save it. The words struck her like a physical blow. She had known that the flame was fading, but she hadn't truly understood the depth of its decay. The very fabric of existence was bound to it. If it were to fall, the world would follow. You must unite with the flame, Daria. the keeper continued. Become its vessel, its protector. Only then can you rekindle its power and restore balance to the world. Daria's mind raced. Unite with the flame. She had always felt its presence inside her, a constant companion, but to become one with it. To carry it in her very soul. Was she ready for that? Could anyone ever be? What will happen to me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The keeper's voice softened, filled with both compassion and sorrow. You will change, Daria. The flame will become a part of you, and you will become a part of it. It will give you strength beyond measure, but it will also require sacrifice. The more you embrace it, the more you will feel its weight. The balance between light and shadow will always be in your hands. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sacrifice. The word echoed through her mind, filling her with a sense of foreboding. Could she give up everything for this? Could she give up herself? How can I know if I am truly worthy? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. The voice of the keeper was gentle, almost tender. The flame does not choose based on worth, Daria. It chooses based on need. The world needs you. The flame needs you. Daria felt a strange sensation in her chest, a warmth spreading through her as though the flame was stirring within her. The pull was undeniable now. The moment had come. There was no more time for hesitation. She stepped forward, and the cosmos around her seemed to collapse into a singular point, the flame at the center of it all. As her hand reached out, she felt it, warmth, like a sun on her skin, but it was more than just physical. It was as if the flame were calling to her, recognizing her as its own. With a deep breath, Daria let the flame consume her. The world shifted once again, and she found herself standing in the center of the stone altar, the night around her dark and still. But she was no longer the same. The flame had become a part of her, woven into her very being. She could feel it, pulsing within her chest, like a second heartbeat. It was both comforting and overwhelming. The keeper's voice echoed in her mind once more, though it seemed distant now, as though from far away. You have made your choice, Daria. The flame is yours. But remember, it is not a power to be wielded lightly. It will test you, it will challenge you. But you are not alone. Daria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settle upon her. She could feel the flame inside her, burning brightly, but there was something else, too, a sense of connection to something greater. The world was vast, and the responsibility now rested upon her shoulders. She opened her eyes, and the clearing before her had changed. The moon was no longer the only source of light. The flame inside her cast its own glow, lighting the night in a soft, golden hue. The darkness no longer seemed so threatening. The forest, though ancient and full of secrets, felt welcoming now, as if it recognized her as one of its own. The flame was no longer just a part of the forest, it was part of her, part of the world. But as she looked toward the horizon, a chill ran down her spine. There was something out there, something lurking in the shadows, waiting. The darkness was not gone. It had only been pushed back. Daria turned, her resolve hardening. She had embraced the flame. She had become its protector. Now, she would face the darkness, and she would not let it win. Daria stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes searching the darkness that stretched before her. The forest had always been mysterious, but now it seemed different, alive in a way she had never known. It was as though the trees themselves whispered secrets to one another, their ancient roots connecting her to something much larger than herself. She could feel their watchful presence, an unspoken pact between the flame within her and the forest around her, but the quiet peace was fragile, and she could feel the shift. There was something stirring in the shadows, something that had been waiting for this very moment. Daria's heart quickened, her breath steadying as she focused on the path ahead. She could no longer turn back, the flame inside her flickered, as though aware of her thoughts, sending waves of warmth through her. It was both a comfort and a challenge, reminding her that she was now one with it. The power was incredible, unfathomable in its depth, but it also made her acutely aware of the responsibility that came with it. She was its guardian now. And the darkness was encroaching, a soft breeze swept through the trees, carrying a faint sound, a low hum, like the murmur of an ancient chant. Daria turned toward the sound, instinctively knowing that it was calling her. She followed the sound, her footsteps sure and steady on the familiar earth beneath her feet. As she moved deeper into the forest, the moonlight seemed to grow dimmer, obscured by thickening shadows. The trees grew closer together, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching like long, crooked fingers into the night. The air grew colder, and the hum grew louder, more insistent. It felt as though something ancient and powerful was watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, so silent that Daria barely noticed it at first. A tall, cloaked figure with eyes that gleamed like embers in the dark. The figure moved with the fluid grace of a predator, its presence sending a shiver down Daria's spine. It stopped before her, its gaze intense and unblinking. "You have come," the figure said, its voice smooth and cold, like the wind howling through a desolate place. "The flame is within you. But do you truly understand what that means?" Daria's breath caught in her throat. She had expected the darkness to come for her, but she had not expected this. The figure before her was not just a shadow, it was something more, something ancient, and it radiated a presence that sent a warning through her. She instinctively took a step back, feeling the weight of the flame inside her, as though it, too, was reacting to this new presence. "I understand enough," Daria said, trying to steady her voice. "I understand that I am the flame's guardian now. And I will protect it, no matter the cost." The figure tilted its head, studying her with eyes that seemed to burn with an eternal fire. "You think the flame is your ally," it said, "but it is not so simple. The flame does not belong to one person. It is a force beyond comprehension, one that has both saved and destroyed. You are merely a vessel, a fleeting moment in its endless cycle." Daria's grip on the flame within her tightened. She could feel its pulse, its steady rhythm, echoing in her chest. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I am its protector," she repeated, her voice firm. "I know what the flame can do. And I will make sure it does not fall into the wrong hands." The figure laughed, a sound like dry leaves crunching beneath heavy boots. "You think you have control of it? You are fooling yourself. The darkness has always been drawn to the flame, just as it is drawn to you. It feeds on your fear, your doubt. And it will consume you, just as it has consumed others before you." Daria's mind raced. She could feel the darkness creeping closer, just beyond the reach of the light that emanated from her. It was true that the flame had drawn the shadows, and she had felt their pull since the moment she first encountered it. But she would not succumb. She had chosen this path, and she would not let herself fall. "I'm not afraid," Daria said, her voice steady. "I won't let it control me." The figure's expression softened, though its eyes still burned with an eerie intensity. "We shall see," it murmured. "The true test is yet to come." Without another word, the figure stepped back into the shadows, vanishing into the night like smoke dissipating into the air. For a moment, Daria stood still, the silence of the forest pressing in on her. The world around her seemed to hold its breath, but she knew that this encounter had not been a mere warning, it was a challenge. The darkness was coming, and it would stop at nothing to consume everything she held dear. Daria took a deep breath, letting the flame inside her burn brighter. She could feel it, stronger now, its power like a raging storm, surging through her veins. She was no longer just the vessel. She was its keeper, its protector. She would fight for the flame. She would fight for the world, and as she turned back toward the heart of the forest, her resolve hardened like the steel of a sword forged in fire. The journey ahead would be long and treacherous. The darkness would continue to test her, seeking to break her. But Daria was no longer the girl who had stumbled upon the flame in the woods. She was its guardian now, and nothing, not even the shadows, could take that from her. The flame was eternal, and so was her fight. The forest grew denser, its ancient trees twisting together as if to form a barrier, shutting out the light. The shadows seemed to deepen with every step Daria took, and the eerie hum she had heard earlier was now a constant presence, vibrating in the air, surrounding her. It was as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting for her next move. She could feel the flame inside her, its warmth radiating through her, but even its light seemed dimmer in this oppressive darkness. The coldness of the night crept into her bones, the chill of the unknown pressing in on her from all sides. The path ahead was unclear, but she pressed on, determined to face whatever challenge lay before her. The darkness would not claim her. The moment she had crossed into the deeper part of the forest, the temperature had dropped. The air felt thick, heavy with an unnatural presence that seemed to stretch out, seeking to consume all in its path. Her breath came out in misty puffs, but the flame within her burned hot, flickering in her chest, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching void. And then she heard it, whispers, soft and insidious, slipping through the cracks of the shadows. At first, she couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, taunting, coaxing, pulling her deeper into the forest, into the heart of the darkness. Come closer. Come closer to the truth. The voice was not the figure's, but it was just as cold, just as calculating. It felt familiar, though, as if it had known her for much longer than she realized. The flame inside her pulsed, and she felt a surge of heat flood her chest. It wasn't just the warmth of the flame, it was power. Uncontainable, raw power. It was the only thing that kept her steady in the face of the overwhelming void. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the whispers, but they only grew louder, more urgent. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees now resembling dark, twisted figures, their gnarled branches reaching out like clawed hands, ready to grab her. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, to turn back, but she refused. She had made her choice. She would not allow the darkness to win. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice louder than she intended, but strong nonetheless. The whispers fell silent, the sudden stillness pressing in around her. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her own heartbeat and the soft crackle of the flame inside her, and then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was not the cloaked figure from before, but something more sinister. Its form was twisted, amorphous, like a shadow that could not hold its shape. Eyes glimmered from within the blackness, glowing a faint red, watching her with an intelligence that sent a cold shiver through her spine. "I knew you would come," the creature's voice rumbled, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to echo through the very ground beneath her. "The flame inside you. It calls to me." Daria stood her ground, her hand instinctively resting over her chest, where the flame pulsed with life. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. The creature's form wavered, shifting as if it could not decide what shape it wished to take. "I want what you carry," it said, the words dripping with hunger. "The flame is mine, and you will give it to me." "It belongs to the darkness." Daria's heart raced. She had known this moment would come, but she had not expected it to be so tangible. The dark force before her seemed to draw in the very air around it, consuming all light and hope. It was the embodiment of the void she had felt growing within the forest, within the world itself. And it wanted the flame, wanted her power. She took a steadying breath, letting the flame inside her grow, feeding it with her resolve. "I will never give it to you," she declared firmly, her voice unwavering. "The flame is not yours to take." The creature's eyes glowed brighter, its form growing more solid. "You think you can control it? You think the flame chooses you? You are nothing but a pawn, a fleeting ember in the grand scheme of things." It hissed, the sound like a serpent's whisper. "The flame will burn you, Daria. And when it does, I will be there to claim it. You cannot escape me." A sense of dread washed over Daria, but the flame inside her flared in response, its heat burning brighter with every word. She could feel it, the power that coursed through her, the immense weight of responsibility. But there was something else, too, something deep within her, a primal instinct, telling her that this moment was one of choice. She was not just a vessel for the flame. She was its protector. "Maybe I'm just an ember," Daria said, lifting her head with newfound strength. "But I will not let you extinguish it. I will stand in the darkness if I must, but I will not let you win." The creature roared in fury, its form shifting violently as it lunged toward her. It was fast, its darkness consuming the very air between them, but Daria was ready. She drew on the flame within her, unleashing its power in a burst of light so blinding that it felt as though the very earth shook beneath her. The creature shrieked as the light collided with it, a force unlike any it had ever known. Its form twisted and writhed, trying to escape, but the light from Daria's flame held it in place, pushing it back. "You are nothing," Daria whispered, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "And I am everything." With a final cry, the creature was consumed by the light, its form disintegrating into nothingness. Leaving only silence behind, Daria stood panting, her body trembling with the force of what had just transpired. The darkness around her began to recede, the oppressive weight lifting from her shoulders. The flame within her still burned bright, its warmth flooding her senses, but it was not the same as before. It was stronger now, more powerful than ever. The forest around her had changed. The trees that had once seemed menacing were now still and calm, their branches no longer reaching like twisted hands. The night no longer felt suffocating, and the stars above shone brightly, as if in acknowledgement of her victory. Daria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over her. She had won this battle, but she knew it was only the beginning. The flame was hers to protect, and she would face whatever came next, with all the power of the fire inside her. Her journey was far from over. But for now, she was at peace. Daria's breath was steady now, though her heart still raced from the battle she had just endured. The darkness had been vanquished, but the eerie silence that followed was heavy, laden with the awareness that the peace she had earned was temporary. The flames inside her still pulsed, warm and alive, but their energy now felt different, more focused, more potent. They had been tested, and they had withstood, but as she stood in the center of the now quiet forest, a feeling lingered in her chest, a strange unease that told her the darkness was not truly gone. The forest had shifted in response to her victory, but the shadows within its depths had not been entirely erased. They were simply waiting, biding their time. Daria knew that the path ahead would be fraught with more trials. The flame was not just a weapon, it was a responsibility, one that weighed on her with every passing moment. She was its protector, its keeper, but she was also its guide. And the deeper she ventured into the mysteries of the flame, the more she realized that her journey was not just about battling darkness, it was about understanding it. The fire in her chest flared again. A reminder that she had more to learn. And that learning would take her to places darker than the one she had just faced. She couldn't afford to be complacent. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, and so, with a steadying breath, she turned away from the heart of the forest, the place where the darkness had once tried to claim her. The path ahead was unclear, but the flame inside her illuminated it, casting long, wavering shadows on the ground as she walked. The moon above her was full, its light spilling over the landscape like liquid silver, a gentle reminder of the balance she had sworn to protect. As she walked, Daria felt the weight of her choices settling on her shoulders. The flame had chosen her, but it was not a choice she had made lightly. She had known the risks from the beginning. She had known that the darkness would come for her, that it would seek to consume the light she carried. But she had also known that the flame would guide her. It would protect her as long as she remained true to her purpose, but there was something else, something new in her thoughts. A feeling that had been growing ever since the figure in the shadows had spoken to her. The figure had said that she was nothing more than a vessel for the flame. That it didn't belong to her. And in some strange, quiet corner of her mind, Daria couldn't help but wonder if that was true. What if the flame was not truly hers to control? What if, in the end, she was just a moment in its eternal cycle, destined to fade like so many before her? The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it away. She would not allow doubt to weaken her resolve. The flame was her responsibility now, and she would protect it. No matter the cost. A rustling noise to her left broke her from her thoughts. Daria's hand instinctively went to the dagger at her belt, her senses sharpening. She wasn't alone. From the shadows of the trees emerged a figure, tall and cloaked, moving silently as if it had materialized from the night itself. Daria tensed, ready for another confrontation, but the figure did not approach. It simply stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You are brave," the figure said, its voice low and unhurried. "But bravery alone will not save you." Daria didn't speak at first. She could feel the power radiating from the figure, something ancient and unsettling. But the flame within her burned brighter in response. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the uncertainty that flickered inside her. The figure tilted its head, studying her as if weighing her very soul. "I seek the flame," it said. "Not to extinguish it, but to understand it. To see it in its purest form." Daria's heart skipped a beat. Could this be another follower of the darkness, seeking to corrupt what she had sworn to protect? Or was it something else, something more ambiguous, more complex than she could comprehend? "The flame is not for you to claim," Daria replied, her voice unwavering. "It is a force that cannot be controlled by any one person. I am its protector, and I will not let it fall into the wrong hands." The figure chuckled softly, a sound that echoed in the stillness. "You misunderstand," it said. "I do not seek to control the flame. I seek only to understand it. For it is the flame that shapes the world, that gives light to the darkness. It is not bound by your will, Daria. It is bound only by its own purpose." The words sent a chill through Daria. She had always believed the flame was something she could control, something she could protect, safeguard from those who would use it for harm. But what if the flame had a purpose of its own? What if she was merely a part of something much larger, much older than she could imagine? "What do you know about the flame?" Daria asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "More than you could possibly understand," it said cryptically. "But in time, you will learn. The flame has chosen you for a reason, Daria. It will shape your destiny, but you must first learn to see beyond your own limitations." Daria's chest tightened as the figure's words sank in. She had always thought of the flame as her burden to bear, her strength to wield. But what if it was more than that? What if it had a will of its own, a purpose beyond her comprehension? The figure took a step forward, its movement graceful and unhurried. "The darkness will come again," it said softly. "It will seek the flame, just as you will seek it. But the true battle lies in understanding what it is, and what it is not." With those final words, the figure turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Daria stood there, frozen for a long moment, her thoughts swirling like a storm. The flame within her burned fiercely, a reminder of her responsibility. But now, a new question had entered her mind. Was the flame truly hers to control? Or was she merely a keeper of something that had a greater purpose, a purpose that had yet to be revealed? As the forest around her returned to silence, Daria took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She could not yet answer the questions that had arisen in her heart, but she knew one thing for certain: the journey ahead would be one of discovery, of truth, and of sacrifice. The flame was with her, and she would fight for it. But she would also search for the answers, answers that might change everything.